Sky went quiet. That's what the ground crews would say later, when the debriefs turned into legends, and the legends turned into something else entirely. It was 3:47 hours when the radios crackled with static that shouldn't have been there, in a sector that was supposed to be cold. The forward operating base Rattlesnake sat in the bowl of the valley like a collection of scattered dice, temporary and fragile under the Afghan night. The perimeter lights made small promises against the darkness. Inside the operations tent, Captain Nix Corvin stood with her arms crossed, watching the thermal displays flicker with ghost signatures that kept appearing and vanishing. She was 31, compact, with a face that had been carved sharp by too many hours squinting into bright skis. Her flight suit hung loose on her frame, worn soft in places where the harness had rubbed for 6 years. The other pilots called her Revenant behind her back, sometimes to her face, and the name carried weight that shifted depending on who said it. She'd been the first to arrive when Echo Company had been pinned down in the Koringal 2 months prior. She'd been the last to leave. Her A-10 Thunderbolt had taken 17 hits that day, and she'd brought it home trailing hydraulic fluid and burning fuel. The aircraft commander had grounded her for a week. She'd spent it in the maintenance hangar, watching the crew chiefs patch the holes. Now the radios hissed with something new. All stations, this is Overwatch. We have movement, multiple signatures, grid November Papa 7432. Possible hostile dismounts, estimated 2 dozen. The voice was young, uncertain. Nix felt the tent shift as bodies moved closer to the displays. Major Garrett Thorne pushed past her without acknowledgement, his bulk making the space smaller. He smelled like coffee and the particular sweat of men who spent too much time in air conditioning. "Get Viper Flight spun up," he said to no one in particular. Viper Flight, the Golden Boys. Nix watched the display, watched the thermal blooms multiply like cells dividing. She'd seen this pattern before, not 2 dozen, more, far more. "Sir, those signatures," she started. Thorne cut her off with a raised hand. "Viper's got it, Captain. Your backup if needed." The dismissal was casual, practiced. She'd heard variations of it for 6 years, since flight school, since her first deployment, since the day she'd chosen the Warthog over faster, prettier aircraft. The A-10 was ugly, slow, outdated, everything the modern Air Force was trying to forget, which meant Nix Corvin was easy to forget too. But the sky was doing something strange. The thermal signatures weren't behaving like insurgents. They were moving with coordination, with purpose, splitting into elements that suggested training, real training. Nix felt the old instinct wake up in her chest, the one that had kept her alive when protocol said she should have been dead. "Sir, recommend immediate QRF alert and additional air assets," she said quietly. Thorne was already walking away. "Viper's launching in 5. Get some coffee, Revenant, it's going to be a long night." She watched him go, then turned back to the display. The signatures were moving faster now. She reached for her helmet. The flight line was a river of noise and kerosene smell, the kind of controlled chaos that happened when billion-dollar machines were asked to wake up and kill. Nix walked past the F-16s, sleek and angular in their revetments, toward the far end where her aircraft waited. They looked like something designed by committee and spite, a flying gun with wings attached as an afterthought. The nose arch showed a woman in profile, face half skeleton, with the words Revenant stenciled beneath in aggressive capitals. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Miguel Rivaz, was already running pre-flight. He was 50 pounds heavier than regulations allowed and 3 times better at his job than anyone else on the line. "Didn't think they'd pull you," he said without looking up from the engine inspection panel. "They didn't, I'm self-deploying." Rivaz paused, wrench in hand, and met her eyes. "That kind of night. That kind of night." He nodded once and went back to work, faster now. Nix climbed the ladder and dropped into the cockpit, her body remembering the sequence of movements before her brain caught up. Straps, connections, circuit breakers, the smell of canvas and lubricant and old fear. The radio chatter was already escalating. "Overwatch, Viper 2-1 is feet dry, sensors hot, searching for targets." "Viper 2-1, be advised ground element is taking effective fire, multiple positions. Cleared hot on visual confirmation." Nix pulled her helmet on and felt the weight settle. The radio chatter had an edge now. the first hints of uncertainty bleeding through the professional calm. She flipped switches in sequence, muscle memory from 1,000 flights. The engines began their distinctive whine, building toward the roar that made the A-10 unmistakable. Rattlesnake Tower, Revenant 11 requesting immediate taxi and takeoff clearance, she transmitted. There was a pause. She could imagine the controller looking at his board, seeing no authorized flight plan, no mission order. Revenant 11 negative, you are not cleared for operations at this time. Stand by. Rattlesnake Revenant, I need clearance now. Revenant, you are ordered to shut down and return to. The radio erupted with overlapping transmissions, voices climbing over each other in pitch and urgency. Contact, contact. We are taking fire from multiple positions. Viper 2-1 taking evasive. I've got missiles in the air. Fuck. All stations. Reaper drone is down. Repeat, Reaper is down. We are blind on northern approach. Nix released the brakes and began rolling. Ravaz snapped a salute as she passed, his face grim. The tower was screaming at her now, but she'd already switched frequencies, already locked into the tactical net where Viper Flight was discovering that the night was much worse than anyone had planned for. Viper 2-1 is Winchester, returning to base, Winchester, out of ammunition already. The fight had been going less than 8 minutes. Nix pushed the throttles forward and felt the Warthog lumber into the sky with its characteristic lack of grace. She was heavy tonight, full fuel and a combat load that would make the aircraft handle like a pregnant whale. 3,000 rounds in the GAU-8 rotary cannon, 6 Maverick missiles, 2 rocket pods, enough destruction to erase a small town, loaded onto an airframe that had been designed when her parents were in high school. The night was cloudless, stars hard as diamonds against the black. Below the valley was a confusion of infrared signatures and tracer fire drawing bright lines between earth and sky. She could see the Viper elements working the target area, dropping precision ordnance that bloomed white-hot in her targeting display. But the fire wasn't stopping. It was intensifying. All stations, ground element is surrounded. They're in the buildings now. We need immediate. The transmission cut off. Nix felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew that silence. She'd heard it before in the seconds before everything went wrong. She pushed the Warthog into a banking turn, diving toward the valley floor while her eyes scanned the targeting pod display. The village was a maze of mud brick compounds and narrow alleys, thermal signatures everywhere, impossible to distinguish friend from hostile. Except, there, a pattern in the chaos. The hostile forces were moving in coordinated bounds, providing covering fire while elements maneuvered. That wasn't Taliban, that wasn't local militia, that was professional infantry. Overwatch, Revenant 11 on station. Request current position of friendlies over. Revenant, you are not authorized. Clear the area immediately. That was Thorne's voice, tight with fury. She ignored him. Ground element, this is Revenant 11. Transmit your position and mark when able. Static. Then a voice, young and breaking. Revenant, we're in compound November 7, north side. They're coming through the walls. We need you now. Nix rolled the aircraft, dropping altitude until she was skimming the ridgeline at 300 feet. The Warthog shuddered through the turbulent air. Her hands were steady on the stick. She'd been here before. Not this valley, not this night, but this moment. The moment when protocol met reality and someone had to decide which one mattered more. 2 months ago she'd made that choice. They'd grounded her for it, written reports, made noises about recklessness and proper command authority. But Echo Company had gone home alive. Every single one of them. The compound appeared in her targeting display, a square of walls surrounding a courtyard. She could see the muzzle flashes now, count them, understand the tactical picture. The friendly position was being assaulted from 3 sides simultaneously. Professional, coordinated, lethal. She armed the gun. The targeting pipper danced across her heads-up display, steadied. Ground element, mark your position, smoke or IR strobe. We can't, they're too close, danger close, Jesus Christ, they're in the courtyard. Nix felt time slow down the way it always did in these moments. Her breath steadied. Her vision narrowed. The Warthog was 400 knots and dropping, the angle steep enough that she could feel the airframe protesting. 300 feet, 200. She could see individual figures now, thermal signatures running between buildings. The compound walls filled her vision. She squeezed the trigger and the world became sound. The GAU-8 roared, a deep bass thrumming that rattled fillings and made bones vibrate. 30-millimeter rounds designed to destroy tanks tore into the earth at 70 rounds per second. The gun fired for exactly 2 seconds. In that time, 140 rounds impacted in a line that carved through the north wall of the compound like a surgical saw. The thermal signatures there vanished, simply ceased to exist. Nix pulled hard on the stick, feeling the G-forces compress her chest and gray her vision at the edges. The warthog clawed back into the sky, trailing the smell of burned powder and hot metal. "Revenant, cease fire, you are danger close, abort, abort." Thorne's voice was ragged with fury and something else, something that might have been fear. She ignored him and came around for another pass. The tactical picture was clearer now. The hostile forces were pulling back from the compound, reorganizing. She'd bought the ground element seconds, maybe a minute. Not enough. Never enough. Ground element status. Revenant, we're still here, they're regrouping on the south side, we count at least. The transmission dissolved into static and the sound of automatic weapons fire. Nix rolled into the attack again, shallower this time, approaching from the west. The warthog was designed for this, to come in low and slow and ugly, to absorb punishment and keep fighting. She fired another burst, watched the rounds walk across the landscape like the footsteps of an angry god. More thermal signatures vanished. But there were so many. Too many. Where had they come from? This was supposed to be a quiet sector, routine patrol, nothing that required the kind of force that was currently trying to overrun a Marine firebase. "All stations, be advised we have additional contacts. Estimated company strength force moving from the north, multiple vehicles. This is a coordinated attack." The radio was chaos now, overlapping transmissions, units calling for support that didn't exist. The QRF was spinning up, but they were 20 minutes out. The Viper flight was Winchester and returning to base. The drones were down. It was just Nix and her ugly airplane and the night that had stopped being quiet. She came around again, lower this time, close enough to see the muzzle flashes with her naked eyes. The warthog took a hit, a sharp crack that made the airframe shudder. Warning lights illuminated on her panel. Hydraulic pressure dropping on System B. She'd seen this before too. She fired the gun again, shorter burst this time, conserving ammunition. The tactical situation was deteriorating. The hostile forces had realized they were facing a single aircraft and were adapting, spreading out, making themselves harder targets. Smart, disciplined. This wasn't random violence. This was a planned operation. The Marines on the ground were fighting for their lives. Nix could hear it in their transmissions, the way the voices got tighter and higher as fear overwhelmed training. She'd been there too, on the ground, before she'd learned to fly. She remembered what it felt like to be pinned down while the world tried to kill you, the way seconds stretched into hours and every breath might be your last. "Ground element, I need you to fall back to the north corner of the compound, acknowledge." "Revenant, there is no north corner anymore, you blew it up." A moment of absolute silence on the radio. Then laughter, young and slightly hysterical. "Okay, yeah, we're moving, 30 seconds. Nix armed a Maverick missile and designated the largest thermal signature she could find, a vehicle or generator or weapons cache, something that was glowing hot enough to be important. She fired. The missile leaped off the rail and streaked downward, its rocket motor painting a line of fire across the darkness. The explosion lit up the valley, a brief second sun that threw shadows in impossible directions. The shock wave rattled her cockpit. When her vision cleared, a crater occupied the space where the thermal signature had been. The hostile fire slackened momentarily, confusion in the ranks. Nix used the opening. She dropped flares and chaff, old defensive systems that made the warthog look like a flying fireworks display, and dove back toward the compound. The Marines were visible now, 6 thermal signatures clustered together, moving with the painful slowness of wounded men. She laid down suppressing fire, long bursts that chewed up the landscape and made the enemy keep their heads down. The gun was getting low. Maybe 800 rounds left, Not enough. Not nearly enough. All stations, Overwatch, be advised additional air support is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The Marines didn't have 15 minutes. They had maybe 3 if Nyx could keep the enemy occupied, if her aircraft held together, if she didn't run out of ammunition, if she took another hit, felt it punch through the right wing, more warning lights. The Warthog was designed to take damage, redundant systems wrapped around a titanium bathtub that protected the pilot, but there were limits. Even ugly, tough airplanes could die. Nyx keyed the radio. Ground element, I'm going to make one more pass. When I do, you run. Don't stop, don't look back, head for the extraction point. Acknowledge. Revenant, there's too many of them, you can't. Acknowledge, silence. Then quieter, acknowledged, and thanks for coming back. Coming back. That's what the other pilots couldn't understand. Why she always came back. Why she flew the slowest, ugliest aircraft in the inventory into the worst situations and didn't flinch. The answer was simple, really. She'd been on the ground once. She'd called for air support that didn't come. She'd watched friends die while fast movers made excuses about weather and risk assessment and proper authorization. She'd sworn that if she ever had the chance, she'd be the one who came back. Always. No matter what, Nyx armed her last 2 Mavericks and selected the remaining rocket pods. Everything left all at once. One final pass and then she'd be down to the gun and whatever was left of her hydraulics. She rolled, inverted, and pulled, diving toward the compound in a maneuver that the flight instructors would have failed her for. The G-meter redlined. Her vision tunneled. She fired everything. The missiles streaked away. The rockets followed, ripple firing in a cascade that turned the Warthog into a flying artillery battery. The world below became fire and thunder and flying debris. The shock waves buffeted her aircraft, threw her sideways. She fought the stick, muscled the Warthog back into controlled flight, and watched her handiwork paint the valley in shades of orange and white. When the smoke cleared, the thermal signatures showed confusion. Disarray. The hostile forces were pulling back, dragging wounded, trying to reorganize. The Marines were running. She could see them on her display, 6 figures moving as fast as wounded men could move, heading for the extraction point 200 meters away. They weren't going to make it, not unless someone kept the enemy occupied. Nyx armed the gun and dove again. The altimeter unwound. 100 feet, 70, 50. She was flying through the valley now between the ridgelines, close enough to make out individual features of the landscape. Close enough to be hit by small arms fire, close enough to be very, very dead if she made a single mistake. The gun roared. She held the trigger down, letting the round spray across the enemy positions in a long, sustained burst. The Warthog shuddered with the recoil. Tracers came up to meet her, green and red lines in the darkness. She heard impacts, felt them, metal punching through metal. Warning screamed in her headset, hydraulic pressure dropping on both systems. Fire warning light in the right engine, fuel leak in the left tank. The list grew longer with each second. But the Marines were almost to the extraction point, almost safe. Just a few more seconds. She pulled up hard, too hard, felt something break in the control system. The stick went mushy, response delayed. The right engine was definitely on fire now. She could see it reflected in the canopy, orange flames trailing behind her like a comet. Revenant, your aircraft is on fire, eject, eject. That was Rivaz watching on the tower cameras, seeing what she couldn't see, but she could feel it. Feel the way the Warthog was dying around her, systems failing in cascade. The tough old bird had taken too much punishment. Even titanium had limits. She fought the aircraft level, used the last of her hydraulics to point the nose at the sky. The Marines were at the extraction point. She could see them on her display, all 6 signatures together, safe. Safe because she'd come back. The right engine exploded. Not dramatically, not like in movies, just a dull crump and then nothing, dead weight and drag pulling the aircraft into a spiral. Nyx pulled the left throttle to idle and reached for the ejection handles. Her hands were steady. She was 31 years old. She'd been flying for 6 years. She'd saved Echo Company 2 months ago, and now she'd saved 6 Marines whose names she didn't know and probably never would. It was enough. It had to be enough. She pulled the handles. The canopy blew off with a sharp crack. The ejection seat fired, 17,000 pounds of thrust compressed into a fraction of a second, enough to compress her spine and gray her vision, and throw her clear of the dying aircraft. The parachute deployed automatically. Nix hung in the straps, watching her A-10 spiral down into the valley, trailing fire and smoke. It impacted in a fireball that lit up the mountainside. Somewhere on the tactical net, voices were calling her name, vectoring the QRF to her position, coordinating her rescue. She couldn't hear them over the ringing in her ears. She was descending into hostile territory, surrounded by the enemy force she just spent 15 minutes trying to kill. Her sidearm held 15 rounds. Not enough. Not even close. But the Marines were safe. The night sky was full of stars, hard and bright and indifferent. The wind carried the smell of burning aviation fuel and cordite. Nix Corvain, Coulson Revenant, watched the ground come up to meet her and wondered if this was how legends ended. Alone, in the dark, with no one watching, the parachute drifted lower. She hit the ground hard, rolled with the impact the way they'd taught her in survival school. The parachute collapsed around her like a shroud. For a moment she lay there taking inventory. Nothing broken, bruised definitely. Her back would hurt for weeks from the ejection. But alive, still alive, she keyed her radio. Any station, this is Revenant 1-1, I am on the ground and mobile, coordinates follow. She read off the numbers from her GPS, watched the screen flicker and die as the battery gave out. Great, alone in the dark with a dying radio and 15 rounds, this was going to be interesting. The sound of engines came from the north, vehicles moving fast, the enemy force regrouping, looking for survivors, looking for her. Nix gathered the parachute, bundled it quickly, and kicked dirt over it. Not much concealment, but better than nothing. She drew her sidearm and started moving south, toward where the Marines had been. Maybe she could reach them. Maybe the QRF would get here first. Maybe a lot of things. The ground was rocky, treacherous in the darkness. She moved carefully, placing each foot with deliberate precision. The survival instructors had been clear. Most pilots who died after ejection died from broken ankles in the first 100 meters. Don't be that pilot. Behind her, the wreckage of her aircraft still burned, a pyre visible for miles. A beacon saying, "Here, the pilot is here, come find her." The engine sounds grew closer. She found a depression in the ground, a natural bowl eroded by ancient water. She slid into it and made herself small, waited. Her hand was steady on the pistol grip. The first vehicle passed 50 meters to her west. She could see it in her night vision, a technical with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. More followed, a convoy searching the mountainside in a grid pattern, professional, coordinated. She counted 12 vehicles before she stopped counting. This wasn't a local force. This was something else entirely. An operation planned and executed by people who knew what they were doing. The kind of people who didn't leave loose ends. She pressed herself flatter into the depression and waited for them to pass. The minutes stretched. The vehicles rumbled by, their engines loud in the mountain silence. She watched them hunt for her, patient and methodical. Eventually they moved on, heading toward the compound where the battle had been. Nix waited another 5 minutes, then started moving again. Every step took her farther from the wreckage, deeper into the valley, closer to maybe surviving this night. The radio crackled weakly in her ear. Revenant. Sis, extraction. Inbound. Broken transmissions, cutting in and out, but they were coming. Someone was coming. She just had to stay alive long enough to be found. The valley stretched out before her, dark and empty and full of people who wanted her dead. Nix Corvain, who'd been underestimated her entire career, who flew the ugly airplane that nobody wanted, who'd saved Echo Company and 6 Marines and earned her call sign 100 times over, started walking. One step, then another. The sky above was clear and cold, and perfect for flying. The extraction team found her 40 minutes later, exhausted and covered in dust but alive. They came in fast and loud, Blackhawks with door gunners and enough firepower to discourage pursuit. She was pulled aboard by hands that were surprisingly gentle, given the circumstances. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the dryness in her throat. Someone handed her water. She drank. The helicopter climbed, putting distance between her and the valley floor. Through the open door she could see the burning wreck of her A-10, still visible, still marking the place where she'd chosen to come back instead of following orders. Major Thorne was waiting at the base when they landed. His face was unreadable in the dawn light. Nix climbed down from the helicopter, her legs unsteady, and came to attention. Thorne looked at her for a long moment. Then he saluted. It wasn't a casual salute, not the quick acknowledgement that officers traded dozens of times a day. It was formal. Precise. The kind of salute that meant something. Behind him, the other pilots were gathering. She could see them in her peripheral vision, faces she'd known for months but who'd never quite seen her. They were seeing her now. Thorne dropped the salute. "The Marines want to thank you," he said quietly. "All 6 of them, alive." Nix nodded once, not trusting her voice. "We'll debrief at 900, Thorne continued. "And then, we need to talk about your next aircraft assignment." "Sir." "Turns out we need more A-10 pilots." His mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Good ones, ones who come back." The word hung in the air between them. Revenant, come back. Return. She'd earned the call sign as mockery, another joke about the pilot who flew dead aircraft. But standing there in the dawn light, covered in the residue of a night that should have killed her, she understood something. Sometimes the dead came back. Sometimes they brought others with them. Sometimes legends were built on the things people survived, not the things they achieved. The sky was brightening, pale blue bleeding across the eastern horizon. Somewhere in that vast expanse, another A-10 was waiting. Ugly, slow, outdated, perfect. Nix Corvin smiled. The debriefing lasted 4 hours. Intelligence officers picked apart every second of the engagement, building a picture of what had happened in the valley. The hostile force had been a probing attack, testing American response times and capabilities. They'd chosen the wrong night, the wrong target, the wrong pilot. The Marines testified, each one telling their version of events. How the fire had come from nowhere, overwhelming them. How they'd called for help and been told to wait. How Revenant had appeared like something summoned, not sent. How her gun had sounded like the end of the world, like judgment, like salvation. Nix sat and listened and said little. What was there to say? She'd done what needed doing. The fact that it violated about 16 different regulations was a problem for people who wore clean uniforms and worked in air-conditioned offices. Major Thorne ran the debriefing with careful precision, asking questions that built a record, a paper trail that could protect her from the bureaucracy that was inevitably coming. Because heroes were complicated. They made good press releases but bad precedents. The Air Force liked rules, procedures, proper channels. It did not like pilots who self-deployed into combat without authorization, even when it worked, especially when it worked. At 1400 hours, Nix was dismissed. She walked back to the flight line, past the F-16s that gleamed in their revetments, toward the maintenance hangar where her old aircraft had lived. Past tense. It was scrap now, scattered across a valley floor, another sacrifice to the god of close air support. Staff Sergeant Rivaz was waiting outside the hangar, smoking a cigarette that regulations said he shouldn't have. He looked up as she approached, his face creased with exhaustion. "I tell you yet?" he asked. "Tell me what?" "You're getting a new bird fresh from depot maintenance. Only 5,000 flight hours on the airframe." Rivaz grinned. "Practically brand new for a warthog." Nix felt something unclench in her chest. "When?" "She's wheels down at 1800. I figured we'd do the nose art tomorrow if that works for you." The nose art. The woman in profile, half skeleton, the word revenant in aggressive capitals. A reminder of what she was, what she'd chosen to be. "That works," Nix said. Rivaz nodded and took a drag on his cigarette. "The crew chiefs are talking about you," he said after a moment. "All of them, what you did last night, word spreading. I just did my job." "Yeah, that's what they're saying, that you did your job when nobody else would." He looked at her, eyes sharp despite his exhaustion. "You know what that means, right? You're the standard now. Every pilot who climbs into an A-10 is going to be measured against what you did." Nix hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been focused on surviving, on getting the Marines out, on bringing her aircraft home in pieces. The idea that she'd become something larger, something symbolic, was uncomfortable. She was just a pilot, just someone who'd made a choice, but Rivaz was right. She could feel it in the way the other pilots looked at her now, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. She'd crossed some invisible line, moved from person to symbol. The pilot who came back. The one who didn't make excuses, revenant. The new aircraft arrived precisely at 1800 hours, riding a C-17 transport like a sleeping dragon. Nix watched the loadmasters maneuver it out of the cargo bay, their practiced movements making the impossible look routine. The A-10 gleamed in the afternoon sun, fresh paint and clean panels. 5,000 hours. Ancient by modern standards, barely broken in by warthog standards. These aircraft were built to last forever, or close enough. Rivaz was already circling it, running his hands over panels, checking connections, making the small adjustments that separated adequate maintenance from excellence. Nix joined him, her own hands tracing the familiar contours. Different aircraft, same soul. She's good, Rivaz said finally. Clean hydraulics, both engines running smooth, avionics package updated last month. Whoever had her before took care of her. Good. Nix peered into the cannon bay, saw the massive drum that fed the GAU-8. Empty now, waiting to be loaded with the distinctive 30mm rounds that made the gun sing. 3,000 rounds of democracy and good intentions. I'll have her combat-ready by tomorrow noon, Rivaz said. Assuming you don't plan to fly her into a mountain in the meantime. Nix smiled. No promises. That night she couldn't sleep. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the engagement, analyzing decisions, second-guessing choices. The ejection had bruised her spine badly enough that lying down was uncomfortable. She sat in her quarters, lights off, and watched the stars through her window. The same stars that had watched her descend into that valley, alone and surrounded. The same stars that would watch tomorrow's missions and next week's battles and all the small violences that comprised a war. Someone knocked on her door at 200 hours. She opened it to find Captain Aaron Vance, call sign Viper 21, the pilot who'd gone Winchester 8 minutes into the engagement. He looked young in the dim hallway light, younger than his 28 years. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. "Can we talk?" Nick stepped aside and let him enter. He sat on the edge of her desk, hands clasped between his knees, and didn't speak for a long moment. "I fucked up last night," he said finally. "I went in too fast, burned through my ordnance, didn't read the tactical situation right. I left when I should have stayed." "You were Winchester," Nick said. "No ammunition, no reason to stay. You stayed. I had ammunition. You had ammunition because you came in slower, because you thought about conservation, because you're a better pilot." Vance looked up at her, his face tight. "They're saying I ran. That Viper flight ran while you stayed and fought. They're wrong." "Are they?" The question hung in the air. Nix thought about it, chose her words carefully. "You flew the mission you were briefed. Fast strike, precision ordnance in and out. That's what the F-16 does. It's not your fault the situation was different than briefed. But you adapted. I fly a different aircraft, a different mission. Don't compare close air support to fast mover interdiction. They're not the same thing." Vance nodded slowly, but she could see he didn't quite believe it. He was going to carry last night for a long time, the weight of what-ifs and should-haves. Every pilot did after their first real engagement. The ones where people died and inches mattered. "The Marines are alive," Nick said. "That's what matters, not who gets credit, not whose tactics were better. They're alive to go home, see their families, fight another day." Vance stood. "Thank you, ma'am." After he left, Nick sat in the darkness and thought about the burden of being the standard. Every pilot would measure themselves against what she'd done, find themselves wanting, carry that weight. She hadn't meant to create that, hadn't wanted to, but intent didn't matter. She was Revenant now, the pilot who came back, and everyone else would live in that shadow. The price of being competent, she supposed, was making everyone else feel inadequate. The stars offered no answers. They never did. Dawn came slowly, light bleeding across the mountains like a wound opening. Nix, dressed in her flight suit, found it had been cleaned and pressed while she slept. Someone in supply taking care of her, the small kindnesses that kept military life bearable. She walked to the maintenance hangar and found Rivaz already there, covered in grease, looking satisfied. "She's ready," he announced. "Combat load, full fuel, every system green. I replaced the ejection seat with a fresh one because I figure you used up the last one's luck." Nix climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit. It felt different from her old aircraft, newer and cleaner, but the essential geometry was the same. The titanium bathtub wrapped around her like armor. The stick and throttle fit her hands like they'd been made for her specifically. The gun sight aligned with her natural sight line. Home. The only home that mattered anymore. She ran through pre-flight checks, her hands moving through the sequence with practiced precision. Every switch, every circuit breaker, every gauge and indicator. The A-10 was old technology, analog in a digital world, but that meant it was simple, robust. You couldn't hack systems that didn't have computers. You couldn't jam radios that used basic frequencies. The Warthog was an aircraft from a simpler time, when close air support meant getting low and slow and putting rounds on target. When precision meant pilot skill, not computer algorithms, the radio crackled. Revenant 1-1, this is Rattlesnake Tower, we have traffic for you. Go ahead, Tower. General Martinez wants to see you at 800 hours, full dress uniform. Nix closed her eyes briefly. Generals meant medals or courts-martial, sometimes both. Acknowledged. She finished the pre-flight and climbed down. Rivaz was watching her with concern. Generals, apparently. Well. Either they're going to pin something shiny on you or throw you in Leavenworth. 50-50 odds. Nix smiled despite herself. I'll let you know how it goes. The walk to headquarters took 15 minutes. The sun was higher now, beating down with the particular intensity of desert mornings. Other personnel saluted as she passed, more than usual, some holding the salute longer than required. Word had spread. The pilot who came back. The one who didn't follow orders but somehow made it work. She wondered what they thought when they looked at her. Hero. Renegade. Both. General Martinez had a corner office with air conditioning and coffee that didn't taste like motor oil. He was 60, compact, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in cockpits before the desk claimed him. Captain Corvin, he said without preamble. Sit, she sat. Martinez poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the desk. You violated about 20 regulations last night, he said. Self-deployed without authorization, engaged targets without proper clearance, conducted operations in excess of tactical guidelines, expended ordnance without approved release procedures, operated a damaged aircraft beyond acceptable safety parameters. Need I continue? No, sir. Good. Because I'm tired and the list gets longer. Martinez sipped his coffee. You also saved 6 Marines who would otherwise be dead, provided close air support that prevented a hostile force from overrunning a forward position, demonstrated exceptional airmanship and tactical judgment, drew fire that allowed the QRF to reach the objective without casualties, destroyed or damaged enemy equipment valued at approximately $7 million. He paused. And lost an aircraft worth $22 million. Yes, sir. Was it worth it? The question was genuine, not rhetorical. Nix thought about those 6 thermal signatures running through the darkness toward safety, thought about the Marine who'd laughed hysterically about the North Corner that didn't exist anymore, thought about being on the ground herself once, calling for help that never came. Yes, sir, Martinez nodded slowly. I agree. So does Washington, though they'll never say so officially. You're being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The ceremony is next week, assuming you don't do anything else stupid before then. Nix felt something like relief. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. This is politics. They need a good story and you're it. Martinez stood and walked to the window, looked out at the flight line. The truth is more complicated. You were right last night about the threat assessment, the tactical situation, the scale of the engagement. You read it correctly when everyone else, including me, got it wrong. He turned back to face her. That's valuable, that kind of instinct, but it's also dangerous, because now every hotshot pilot is going to think they can ignore orders if their gut says different, and 99 times out of 100 they'll be wrong. Nix understood. She was being praised and warned simultaneously. Being told she'd done the right thing while being informed she shouldn't do it again. The military's eternal paradox. I understand, sir. Do you? Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to be famous for about 15 minutes. Press interviews, recruitment posters, the whole circus. They're going to use you to show that the A-10 still has value, that women can fly combat missions, that the Air Force is modern and flexible, and all that public relations horseshit. Martinez's voice was tired. And then they're going to quietly reassign you somewhere safe, where you can't embarrass anyone or make waves or demonstrate that rules are optional if you're good enough. Nix felt cold. You're grounding me. I'm protecting you. There's a difference. Martinez returned to his desk. You're too good at your job, Captain. That makes you dangerous to people who are adequately good at theirs. They'll destroy you if given the chance, not out of malice but out of self-preservation. So what do I do? You smile for the cameras. You accept the medal. And then you take the assignment I'm going to give you and you fly it perfectly by the book, no heroics, no initiative. You become adequately good for a while, until people forget that you were once exceptional. The words hit like a physical blow. Nix had spent her entire career proving herself, fighting against assumptions, demonstrating competence in the face of doubt. And now, having finally succeeded, she was being told to hide it. Is that an order, sir? It's advice, from someone who made his own career on being too good too early. Martinez's expression softened slightly. I was a fighter pilot in the Gulf War, shot down 3 MiGs in 2 days. Got medals and headlines and all the attention that comes with it, and then spent the next 10 years in desk jobs and training commands because I'd peaked too soon and made my superiors nervous. What happened? I learned patience, learned to be adequately good in public and exceptional in private, learned that the military is a long game, not a sprint. He held her gaze. Eventually, I made general. But it took twice as long as it should have because I'd scared people with competence when I was a captain. Nix absorbed this, felt the weight of it. So I hide. You survive, there's a difference. Martinez pulled a folder from his desk. You're being reassigned to Nellis instructor duty. You'll teach A-10 tactics to new pilots. It's important work, necessary work, and it keeps you out of combat for a while. How long? 2 years, maybe 3. Until the news cycle moves on and you're just another instructor with a decent record. He slid the folder across. It's a good assignment, Captain. You'll save more lives teaching proper tactics than you ever could flying missions. Think about it that way. Nix took the folder without opening it. When do I leave? 2 weeks. After the medal ceremony, after the interviews, after you've served your purpose as a symbol. Martinez's voice was gentle now. I know this feels like punishment. It's not. It's how you survive long enough to make the real difference later, when you have the rank and authority to change things from the inside. She stood, folder in hand, and saluted. Martinez returned it. At the door she paused. Sir, those 6 Marines, I'd do it again. I know, Martinez said. That's exactly why you have to leave. The next week passed in a blur of cameras and prepared statements. Public affairs officers coached her on what to say, how to say it, which questions to dodge. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was held on the flight line, with full media coverage and a formation of A-10s flying overhead in her honor. General Martinez pinned the medal on her uniform while cameras clicked and reporters scribbled notes. Nix stood at attention and felt nothing. The medal was heavy, silver and bronze suspended from a blue and white ribbon. It represented valor, exceptional achievement, heroism in combat. It felt like a bribe. Keep quiet, accept the accolades, go away. She smiled for the cameras and said what she was supposed to say about duty and service and the honor of wearing the uniform. The reporters ate it up. Young female pilot, flying an outdated aircraft, saving Marines against impossible odds. It was the kind of story that made good copy, the kind that recruitment offices could plaster on posters. Be like Captain Corvin, be revenant. The Marines attended, all 6 of them. They stood in the formation, dress blues pressed to knife-edge precision, faces young and serious. When the ceremony ended, they approached her one by one, shaking her hand, thanking her. Their words were simple and genuine and hurt more than anything Martinez had said. You came back for us, one said. Lance Corporal Darian Wells, 22 years old, from Tennessee. She remembered his thermal signature running through the compound, stumbling but moving. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, Nix said. The interviews followed. Air Force Times, Defense News, a segment on CNN where the anchor called her a hero and she demurred and said she'd only done her job. A profile in stars and stripes that made her sound larger than life, a warrior goddess descending from the sky. She read it and didn't recognize herself. The real Nix Corvin was exhausted, bruised, uncertain about the future. The version in print was confident, capable, inspiring. A symbol, not a person. Staff Sergeant Rivaz threw her a party in the maintenance hangar, unofficially official, the kind of gathering that happened when nobody asked permission. The crew chiefs showed up with beer and someone's nephew's band. The hangar smelled like aviation fuel and barbecue. Nick stood near her aircraft, the new one, and accepted congratulations from people who'd ignored her a month ago. The nose art had been finished that morning. The woman in profile, half skeleton, the word Revenant. But Rivaz had added something new underneath, small letters. She came back. Present tense. Not past. A promise, not a memory. You like it? Rivaz asked, appearing at her elbow with 2 beers. He handed her one. It's perfect. Figured you earned a revision. He clinked his bottle against hers. To coming back. To coming back, Nix echoed. They drank. Captain Aaron Vance approached after midnight when the party had quieted and most people had drifted away. He looked sober despite the occasion, his face thoughtful. I heard about Nellis, he said without preamble. I'm sorry. Don't be, it's a good assignment. It's bullshit. Vance's voice was flat. You save 6 Marines and they exile you to Nevada to teach students. Meanwhile, I blow my load in 8 minutes and get to keep flying missions. Where's the justice in that? There isn't any, Nix said. The military isn't about justice. It's about order, structure, predictability. I threaten that. By being good at your job. By being good in a way that makes other people look bad. She finished her beer. Martinez is right. I'm better off teaching for a while, at least until people forget. They won't forget. Vance looked at the aircraft, the nose art, the promise written there. Every pilot in this war is going to know the story. The pilot who came back when nobody else would. That's not something people forget. He was probably right. Nix understood that she'd become something she'd never intended to be. A standard, a legend, a burden for every pilot who would climb into an A-10 and wonder if they could measure up. She hadn't wanted that, hadn't asked for it, but intent didn't matter. The story would outlive her career, probably outlive her. Years from now, pilots would tell new lieutenants about Revenant, the captain who self-deployed into a hot LZ and saved 6 Marines. The details would change, the truth would become fluid, but the essence would remain. She came back. Present tense. Always. The flight to Nellis happened on a Tuesday civilian transport because her own aircraft was staying at Rattlesnake with a new pilot. Captain Melissa Ortega, fresh from training, competent but unproven. Nix had met her briefly, passed on what wisdom she could in 15 minutes. Don't trust the first threat assessment. Come in low. Conserve ammunition. If Marines call for help, you go. No excuses. Ortega had listened with the intensity of someone trying to memorize scripture. Good. Maybe she'd remember when it mattered. The Nevada desert looked alien after Afghanistan, less hostile somehow despite the heat. Nellis was enormous, sprawling, the kind of base where you needed a map to find the commissary. Nix reported to the A-10 training squadron and met her new commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cara Hendricks. Hendricks was 45, with gray threading her hair and the calm competence of someone who'd seen everything twice. Welcome to the 66th Weapons Squadron, Hendricks said. I've read your file. Impressive, also troubling. Ma'am, you're here because you're too good and too dangerous in equal measure. Hendricks smiled slightly. I'm here because I ask too many questions. We should get along fine. The office was utilitarian, white boards covered in tactical diagrams, coffee maker in the corner releasing the smell that was universal to military installations. Through the window, Nix could see A-10s on the flight line, students running practice patterns. Your job, Hendricks continued, is to teach these pilots how to stay alive while accomplishing the mission. Not heroics, not glory, just the fundamentals that keep them from getting shot down. Understood, ma'am. I doubt that, but you will. Hendricks pulled out a schedule. You'll have 3 classes, 30 students total, mixed experience levels, fresh from flight school to 4-year veterans looking to upgrade. Some will wash out, that's expected. Your job is to identify which ones and cut them before they kill themselves or anyone else. Nix took the schedule and scanned it. Ground school, simulator time, live fire exercises. A comprehensive program designed to turn adequate pilots into competent ones. Any questions? When do I start? Tomorrow 700, first class is ground school, basic threat assessment and tactical decision making. Hendricks stood. Captain, a word of advice. These students will know who you are. They'll have read the stories, seen the footage. Some will worship you, others will resent you. Neither is helpful. How do I handle that? By being boringly competent. Teach the material, answer questions, don't elaborate on your own experiences unless directly relevant. Hendricks's expression was knowing. You're not their peer anymore. You're their instructor. There's a difference. Nix understood. Don't be revenant. Be Captain Corvin, instructor, just another face at the front of the classroom. Hide the exceptional, display the adequate. Survive. That night she unpacked in her new quarters, base housing that was identical to every base housing she'd ever occupied. Beige walls, government furniture, the particular silence that comes from living alone. Her medals went in a drawer, out of sight. The only decoration was a photo that Rivaz had printed for her, the crew chief standing in front of her old aircraft, before that night in the valley, before she'd ejected and watched it burn, before Revenant had become more than just a name. The first class was waiting when she arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes early. 20 students, a mix of ranks from second lieutenant to captain, all wearing the particular expression of people trying to look attentive before coffee had kicked in. They snapped to attention when she entered. Seats, Nix said. They sat with the rustle of flight suits and the scrape of chairs. She wrote on the whiteboard, "Close air support threat assessment," then turned to face them. "My name is Captain Corvin. For the next 8 weeks I'm going to teach you how to not die while providing CAS. Questions." A hand went up. Second Lieutenant James Park, according to his name tape. Young, eager, probably 3 months out of flight school. "Ma'am, is it true you—" "No," Nix cut him off. "Whatever you've heard, whatever you've read, the answer is no. I'm not here to talk about my experiences. I'm here to teach you tactical decision-making. Clear?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now who can tell me the first rule of close air support?" Silence. They glanced at each other, uncertain. "Anyone," Nix pressed. "Don't hit friendlies," someone ventured. "That's not a rule, that's basic competence. The first rule is, slow down." She wrote it on the board in capital letters. "Fast movers want to come in at 500 knots, drop their payload, get out. That's interdiction, not CAS. Close air support requires loiter time, visual acquisition, communication with ground elements. You cannot do those things at 500 knots. A captain in the back raised his hand. Robert Chen, fighter pilot doing the mandatory CAS QOW. What if the threat environment requires speed? Then you don't provide CAS. You call for interdiction and get out of the way. Nix met his eyes. This is not a fighter. This is not about speed or maneuverability. This is about being where you're needed for as long as it takes. If that makes you uncomfortable, there's the door. Chen's jaw tightened, but he didn't leave. Good. Uncomfortable was where learning happened. Nix spent the next 4 hours walking them through threat assessment methodologies, tactical decision matrices, the art of reading a battlefield through limited information. She used generic examples, hypothetical scenarios, nothing that drew from her own experience. At lunch, Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks appeared in the doorway. "Captain, a word." They walked to the parking lot out of earshot. Hendricks lit a cigarette, offered one to Nix. She declined. "How'd it go?" Hendricks asked. "Fine. They're attentive. Any hero worship. I shut it down, told them I'm not here to discuss my experiences." "Good, keep it that way." Hendricks exhaled smoke. "I got a call this morning. Stars and Stripes wants to do a follow-up piece, 6 months later kind of thing. I told them no." "Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. I'm not protecting you. I'm protecting my squadron." Hendricks's voice was matter of fact. "You're a distraction. A good distraction, competent instructor, but still. The sooner you become furniture, the better. Understood?" "I doubt that either," Hendricks said, "but you will." The afternoon session was simulator time. Nick split them into pairs, gave each team a scenario. Urban CAS, troops in contact, high collateral damage risk. Standard nightmare fuel. She watched them work through it, observed their decision processes. Most went too fast, trusted their sensors too much, failed to communicate properly with the simulated ground element. A few showed promise. Lieutenant Sarah Vickers methodically worked the problem, slowing down, asking questions, building a mental picture before committing to action. Captain Mark Reyes demonstrated good threat prioritization, identifying the most dangerous targets first. The rest struggled. By 1700 hours, they were exhausted and frustrated. Several had killed friendlies in their simulations. Two had lost their aircraft to ground fire. One had run out of fuel because he'd forgotten to monitor his gauges while fixated on the target. Tomorrow we'll run the same scenarios again, Nix announced. Tonight, I want each of you to write down what you did wrong and how you'll fix it. 2 pages typed. Dismissed. They filed out, talking among themselves. Lieutenant Park lingered, clearly wanting to ask something. What is it, Lieutenant? Ma'am, in your experience, Nix held up a hand. I told you I'm not discussing my experiences. I understand, ma'am, but how do you know when to commit, when to hold back? There's so much information, so many variables. How do you make the right call? It was a genuine question asked without guile. Nix considered it. You don't, she said finally. You make the best call you can with the information you have. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. The art is learning to tell the difference before you commit, not after. But what if you have to decide right now? No time to think. Then you rely on training, pattern recognition, muscle memory. Nix met his eyes. Which is why we're doing this. So when the moment comes, you don't have to think, you just know. Park nodded slowly. Thank you, ma'am. After he left, Nix sat in the empty classroom and stared at the whiteboard. Close air support threat assessment. Sterile words for life and death decisions. She thought about that night in the valley, the thermal signatures multiplying. The moment when she'd known that protocol was wrong and instinct was right. How did you teach that? How did you compress 6 years of experience into 8 weeks of instruction? You couldn't. You just